Welcome to the Fine Art Pathway. In this talk, I will introduce you to a number of students' work to give you a sense of the range of materials, the subject matter, the ambition, and the variety of approaches that students have adopted to presenting their work, which is all drawn from final major projects. This was work by a student called Laura who made this powerful figurative piece, a cruciform effigy of herself, which was stuffed with kind of notes, diary entries that she'd made in response to the problems that others would often burden her with. She soaked the figure in the bath, which is what all these stains are that you can see on the legs of the figure, before she dried it out and suspended it as part of her final major exhibition. This is work by Ria, an Access student who's on the course, who would deal with very narrative subject matter in the most subtle and kind of ambiguous ways. Ria would often explore the same ideas in a number of different forms, here using resin cast spheres and plaster cast elements suspended from metal rods. Really interesting work. This is another image of her from her final installation, where in this top piece she's actually cut up offcuts of her work and reassembled those. So working from starting with very literal meanings and finding ways of exploring those in metaphorical ways, then to just playing with materials and finding what meanings she could make by reconfiguring those. Two very different approaches. This is work by a student called Becky, who collaborated for the whole of her foundation year with her sister, exploring ideas to do with freedom and movement. Here is a short extract of a film made of that live performance during the private year. This work explores very similar ideas. A student called Megan, who translated those ideas into an installation rooted in drawing. She actually went on to study dance at the Laban Centre. These three paintings were made by Gabriel, who you'll be working with on Fridays, who's just started his MA at the Royal College of Art. These were based on films he made of his mother swimming. She swims every day, and they were made in very interesting set of circumstances. Gabriel's always worked in a very interdisciplinary way, and you'll have a chance to kind of meet him and talk to him throughout the course if you specialise in fine art. This piece was a sculpture that rotated with elements that slid up and down to make different images. It was like a kinetic sculpture. A student called Galahad, who's on the BA at Canterbury. This work is by Elliot, who managed to get permission to cut up a derelict mobile home to make this work, which explored issues to do with the way we're affected by the spaces we inhabit, attitudes towards home, and also response to the refugee crisis that he was very conscious of at the time. Here's some photographs of the mobile home that the sculpture was made from, and an artist's book just below. This work developed out of film that he'd made, that he'd been projecting onto kinetic sculptures, but he was kind of frustrated by this. He wanted the object to embody the ideas rather than rely on imagery being projected onto the surfaces. Some years ago, we ran a number of projects working with partner institutions in northern France and in the south of England. And one year we took the students across to work with art students in Calais, and they collaborated on a number of really exciting artworks. This was the location for an experimental film project that the students came up with the idea of in response to the refugee crisis that they were all too aware of as they explored the city. Here are the students negotiating with the locals to get permission to use their electricity supply to project films onto the surface of that derelict building that you saw in the first image there. What we see in the film is one of the students performing the idea of a homemaking rituals. So here she's pasting up wallpaper filmed in the studio and then taken out, projected onto the outside of the building. So in this image we can see a miniature model of a bombed out building. Louis was so affected by the news footage he saw of the atrocities that were being carried out in Syria that he was moved to make these really effective sculptures which he exhibited in a blacked out installation shown alongside a film projection. This is work by Stella, a student who went to study in New York, Rhode Island School of Design, then took some time out to set up and run a project space, and has now just started her MA at Yale, and has just had the first review for an exhibition that she laid on just at the beginning of lockdown in the New York Times. This work was inspired by architecture. Another student who worked in a very interdisciplinary way, working from sculpture. Here in her notebook you can see a welded steel sculpture she made, which she filmed performances of her interacting with, then were translated into a series of small paintings here that she then translated into large-scale oil paintings for her final major project installation. In this work by Annabelle, a student who's on the foundation, who's now on the BA at UCA Canterbury, we can see a book, a kind of parody of a book on a colossal scale, 9 pages, 7 feet high. Annabelle documented every aspect of a process digitally, and then she would use those images to make concertina books, which became another aspect of her practice. And Emma, who made a timeline of drawn from images that had a kind of historical significance in the town in Deal, where she was brought up, and she painted those on objects that had washed up on the beach, and then published a book that complemented the installation. And actually went on with a group of other fine art students and lens-based students to work with Arnold Schwarzman, one of our former governors, to do a project with Turner Contemporary for the Festival of Colour, and they made these massive sculptures of giant sticks of rock which were exhibited outside Turner Contemporary. This is an A1 etching of a kitchen sink to Ellie, who was actually hospitalised during her final major project, and just used whatever was available. Again, rather like Shen Shen's work, we see the ordinary becomes extraordinary. This painting by Joe was 7 foot square, and was based on the back garden on the path to the kitchen door. And really what this is about is not that location, it's about his the extent to which he was alive to the world, what we see in the orchestration of colours and shapes, the rhythms, the ambiguity of the piece is a real sense of delight and openness, which is reflected in a number of students' work. Max here, we could say the same thing. This is actually based on the studios here at UCA, which is not many people actually deal with that. They often feel compelled to deal with subject matter that's elsewhere. It's quite refreshing to see someone just deal with where they are. This installation was by a student called Shen Shen, who came from southern China and had been painting, but after the Easter break, where she went home and took a whole series of photographs of the place she came from, she decided to focus more on her photography, and these extraordinary photographs were so full of pathos and affection for the place she came from, very humble but quite magical, and she exhibited those and then published a book. Here are some of the stills from that book, and then also decided that she'd make a film.
为了映写要几多水，恰巧无江春水在西凉晚，碧云将我语出夜地，位于出门上几多水，恰似一江春水楼高水发，碧云中手上来烈地，挑然日气几多有在，恰似一江春水向月中。 飘然日气云应犹在，明月中尽是出言飘然日气云犹在。那看，只剩出言纠结上映行。So,
what you can hear there in the film is the sound of Shen Shen describing the things that we're seeing in the images, and as the images themselves are layered in the film, then they are collaged in sound as well, so sometimes the descriptions overlap and partly obscure each other. This is Jack Lavender, who also did the BA at Canterbury. He now has a studio in Margate. He shows with the Approach Gallery, one of the most successful students we've had going through the BA at Canterbury, who would collage together different found materials, and then make interventions on those found materials, cutting, adding, painting into, modifying, making subtle interventions, and very exciting work. Did the BA at Canterbury and then went to the Royal College of Art. Was taken on by the Approach Gallery before he'd actually graduated from his MA. Alice's work was about rhythm and pace and energy, and all of her drawings would be kind of overlaid and bits removed and repeated, echoed, inverted. She used a combination of kind of digital processes and translated those into drawings that would then be the basis for paintings. Really beautiful, very subtle. This is work by a student called Jazz, who set about inverting stereotypes by working on car parts and playing around with representations of women, and the idea of the gaze was kind of central to what she was up to. In her year, she was instrumental in organising a series of really exciting collaborative projects. She actually went to Chelsea and came back to complete her degree at UCA. Some of the most successful students have been students who have worked collaboratively, who've come up with exciting ideas for projects to work with other students. Ione was in her year, who made this. This was a huge painting, which ended up. She made films, painting. That canvas that was hanging in the staircase was actually meant to work together with a sculpture that a 3D student was making. The structure collapsed, and it took on a new lease of life. It ended up, you can see here in the window of this massive kind of warehouse, where the students got together and created an installation where they had a number of video links established, one with a gallery in Paris, one with an external projection in Le Havre, and that there was a kind of live link between the different locations across France, and this was actually in Dover, the warehouse, and you can see irony here, as this projection is a projection of what was happening in the warehouse being relayed to France, re-recorded and sent back and projected back into that space. So she was painting in response to the imagery that was projected back into the space. Very exciting and risky kind of approach to making work. I wanted to show you a section about students dealing with the natural world, our relationship with animals and nature. This is Aidan, who would only work from he worked on the docks, had built his own studio out of the remains of the bombed barracks in Deal, and he couldn't work it, found it very hard to work in the studio. Everything he made was made on site. I mean, he would do all his preparation in the studio and review and critique the work. Sophie, who made this astonishing installation, which was a repeated image. It's the same subject matter. It was about the impact of waste on the environment. Made these kind of sculptures which were suspended in front of this huge drawing that was presented on the wall behind. And Sophie went onto the illustration animation course, but then from fine art, but then took some time out and then came back and is now on the BA in fine art, and incredible work. I mean, I'm continually taking students up to see her space and to meet her and see how she works, to see her journals and sketchbooks. Really, really exciting work. So students dealing with kind of attitudes towards the rag trade, and this work by Izzy. She made a map of where all the clothes had come from that she'd owned, that she still had in her possession. It was a kind of and made an animation where she put the garments together with kind of information about where she'd worn them and where they were made and who by and what the potential impact on the environment might have been. So students bringing together different materials, transcribing images of the urban environment onto kind of found natural and man-made materials. This work was all made by a student who wanted to talk about the way we treat animals. Rosie spent the first phase of her project in an abattoir, taking photographs, making drawings, and then wanting to present those in a way that would draw us in because of the beautiful kind of aesthetic of the work. But then as we look in more closely, we start to get kind of unnerved by the disturbing implications without it being spelt out too literally, what look like cell structures and cut surfaces where meat's been cut up. It's work by Casey, actually burning images, symbolic images, into the bones of a dead fox, making work. So there's, I suppose, in this section, there are a number of students looking at the idea of ritual and symbolism. This is work by Benjo, who made these what look like tribal masks made out of discarded garments and found materials, whether it's feathers or bits of grass. Who made a series of performances that he filmed on location. And this whole project began with him drawing into coffee that he'd spilt in his sketchbook. Kind of the oddest and most unlikely beginning. This is work by Denise, an Access student who worked in an incredibly interdisciplinary way. From painting to kind of installations like this. These kind of hybridized, portraits made by a student called Alex. Each one was a combination of other images of his peers in the group. Jasper, who kept reprocessing images. These were a series of portraits which were photographed digitally, and then the files were corrupted, and which produced these abstract patterns. And then he broke those down into using Logic Pro to play them as sound, and then translated the sound files back into visual form, which is what you see on the right here, and then drew back into that Evie, who again, rather like Alex, a series of portraits of her peers in the group, but then playing around with kind of merging those. So, you students using all kinds of processes, cyanotype, screen printing, light sensitive chemicals, casting. This is Diana Yao. Everything here is made. These are resin casts of jelly babies with letters embedded in the resin casts. So many students deconstructing and reconstructing content, whether it's kind of first-hand drawings that are then kind of are worked alongside, integrated into installations, or brought together with other imagery from different contexts. Sometimes distilled down, like in these fantastic paintings of Eleanor's, another student who actually went off to do photography in Bristol, but came back to do the fine art courses, now making wonderful work on the BA course here in Canterbury. This piece by Connor, this is a small A4 drawing, exquisitely crafted drawing of a kind of spaces reflected into each other, a kind of urban space. And his work was chosen to be in the Origins exhibition from all the work made in that year on the foundation at Canterbury. It's a very prestigious recognition of the level of his achievement. Here's some of his other work that he would make as well. This is a drawing above a series of layered photographs, which were analogue photographs, which were scanned in and then printed. I think they were printed digitally. This is work by Georgie Andrews, who I'm excited that you'll have the chance to meet. She actually went off to Leeds to do a degree in fine art, but came back to Canterbury, went on to get a first for a BA, and then went on to the MA and got a first for the MA as well. These pieces were made. We were very lucky to have European funding the year that she's in the time she was on the course, and we were able to participate in a number of really exciting interregional cultural regenerative projects. She came over to France and to northern France, and was really taken by the kind of industrial architecture along the coast of northern France. And she came back and cut these discs out of steel and rusted the steel, and then screen printed these images taken from the photographs she'd taken. Many students explore ideas of how to bring together a range of different reference material, whether it's kind of physical things from the what found out in the world, with representations of the spaces that they come from. This is work by Sarah Jackson, who went off to Brighton initially, but decided that she'd rather come back to UCA to complete her degree, and a fantastic success story. She came back, won was one of the students who was chosen for the Platform Graduate Award at Turner Contemporary, and after graduating had her work shown there at the gallery. Another student from quite some time before, interestingly, pulling together information. Obviously there are kind of analogies in terms of the working methods. What's interesting here is the way that we have fragments of the photographs giving us bits of information, but nothing that we can read clearly. leading us to kind of imagine what the rest of the image might be, the rest of the narrative. And also, interestingly, the blank ledger pages, the inside of envelopes, and the backs of photographs with cryptic messages, descriptions of who it was and when it was, where it was, perhaps, inferring the desire to kind of pin down some essential information. Really beautiful and very effective work. Other students have, this is Alex, who is on the BA here as well, who in a sense it's like a collage. She's made the object that we see in the painting. She's actually built that out of, cut the shapes and made the construction, and then lit it, and then made a photorealist painting of it, but transforming the colour and the light. Show you some images of other approaches to playing around with kind of fragmenting, deconstructing and reconstructing imagery, which seems to be a kind of recurring approach, although produces very different outcomes. This is work by Alice, whose paintings began with some drawings she made in response to the summer project, and actually influenced the development of her ideas right through to the final major project. We can see she actually produced 3 or 4 different kind of final installations at the end of the year. Really magical work, and similar kind of experiences work by Dolly, who made films and projected them onto mirrors in one of the public spaces around the building, and those moving images bounced off the mirrors and around the space and brought the whole space to life. Very effective piece of work and informed by fantastic research. I'm just going to show you a few remaining images which I particularly wanted you to see, obviously there's a story to tell behind each of these students' work, which is what makes the work interesting and exciting, and which is most useful to hear really for you guys. But I'm just going to, as I run through these images, give you an idea of some of the other approaches to making and presenting work. Just wanted to say that probably one of the most important things to remember about choosing fine art as an option is that it tends to be students that are interested in finding out what it is that they want to investigate, that are interested in kind of finding the problems that they want to solve, if you like, rather than those that are keen to work from a brief. I think that's the way we normally describe it. There are always exceptions, but on the whole, they are highly motivated, highly self-motivated. All art students are highly motivated, highly self-motivated, independently driven students that thrive on being in a context where they're continually challenged by the work that's being made around them. They thrive on being in an environment where students are making work that puts them outside of their own comfort zone, that leads to all kinds of discussions about what art should be, what its purpose is, what its value is, what it is now, what it wasn't in the past, and perhaps what it needs to be in the future. So I hope that's been useful and given you a bit of a sense of the scale and the range of the work. And if there's anything that you're particularly interested in hearing more about what the students' work was about, or what they went on to do, I'd be delighted to talk to you more about their work. Enjoy the rest of the slideshow.